Looking back, I should have seen the signs long before everything blew up. My name's Michael, and up until recently, I thought I had a pretty decent life. My wife, Jessica, and I had been married for 6 years. I'd always seen her as my partner, my rock, my everything. We weren't perfect, no couple is, but I thought we were solid. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Jessica was beautiful, smart, and, let's face it, she knew it. She loved attention, and while I sometimes felt uneasy about how much she flirted with other men, I brushed it off. I figured that was just her personality. She liked being the center of attention, and I convinced myself it didn't mean anything. I trusted her. But about 6 months ago, things started to feel off. Jessica was spending more time away from home. At first, it was little things, working late, going out with friends, or running errands, that took way longer than they should have. Then, she got glued to her phone. She'd sit on the couch, scrolling and texting, but if I walked by, she'd lock the screen so fast you'd think she was hiding state secrets. If I asked who she was talking to, she'd roll her eyes and say, "Oh, just the girls." I told myself I was overthinking it. But still, there was this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right. One night, I decided to bring it up. I asked her if everything was okay between us. She laughed it off and said I was being paranoid. "Why would you even think that?" she asked, her voice dripping with annoyance. I didn't have an answer. It was just a gut feeling, a sense that the woman I'd built my life with was slipping away. The real cracks started to show when Jessica began dressing up more than usual. She'd put on makeup to go grab groceries, or wear her best dresses for what she called girls' nights out. One Friday evening, I came home from work early to surprise her, only to find her rushing out the door in a tight red dress and heels. She froze when she saw me. "You're home early," she said, her tone not exactly thrilled. "Yeah, thought we could have a quiet night together," I replied. "Where are you off to?" "Oh, just meeting Sarah for drinks," she said, avoiding eye contact. I didn't push it, but something about the way she avoided my gaze stuck with me. Then came the car, my car. Jessica never really liked driving, so she'd often take my truck whenever she went out. I didn't mind, we shared everything. But one day, as I was cleaning it out, I found something that didn't belong. A rubber wrapper. Used. I stood there, staring at it like it was some alien artifact. My heart dropped into my stomach. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it wasn't hers. Maybe someone else had borrowed the truck. Maybe. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't some random mistake. It was evidence, plain as day. My hands were shaking as I held that stupid little piece of plastic. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, but another part of me was scared of what she might say, scared of what it would mean for us. That evening, I waited for Jessica to come home. When she walked through the door, smiling like nothing had happened, I couldn't hold it in. "Jess, we need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She looked at me, confused. "What about?" I held up the rubber wrapper. "This. I found this in the truck." Her eyes widened for a split second before she caught herself. "What the hell is that?" she asked, feigning innocence. "You tell me," I shot back. "Because it sure as hell wasn't mine." She laughed. She actually laughed. "Michael, come on. You're being ridiculous. That could have been there for months. Maybe from before we even got together. In a truck I've had for 4 years." I said, my voice rising. "You're seriously trying to tell me that this just magically appeared?" Her face hardened. "Are you accusing me of something?" she snapped. "Because if you are, just say it." "I don't have to accuse you," I said. "This speaks for itself." She rolled her eyes. "You're paranoid. Always have been. Maybe if you'd spend less time playing detective and more time being a husband, we wouldn't even be having this conversation." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. She wasn't even trying to deny it anymore, she was deflecting, turning it around on me. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I'd never felt so angry, so betrayed, in my entire life. That night, I didn't sleep. Jessica went to bed as if nothing had happened, but I stayed up, replaying our conversation in my head. Every word, every lie, every little detail she tried to brush off. It was like a puzzle I couldn't put together. Who was she meeting? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, why? The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. I needed answers, no matter how much they might hurt. Jessica thought she could lie her way out of this, but I wasn't going to let her. And so began the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. The morning after our confrontation, I called in sick to work. There was no way I could sit in an office and pretend everything was normal. My mind was spinning, and I needed to figure out what the hell was going on. Jessica had left early for what she claimed was a meeting, but I wasn't buying it. First, I started with her phone. I'd never been the type to snoop, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I tried guessing her passcode. No luck. Then, I remembered something. A while back, I'd seen her unlock it with a pattern. I closed my eyes, trying to recall how her fingers moved. After a few attempts, I got it. Her messages were a treasure trove of lies. There were conversations with someone named Tyler, and they weren't exactly subtle. He'd sent her photos of himself, shirtless, flexing in front of a mirror. She'd replied with flirty comments and emojis that made my stomach churn. It wasn't just the texts, though. There were missed calls from him, and photos she'd saved, photos of them together. At a restaurant, at the beach, in my truck. My truck. The same truck where I'd found the rubber wrapper. I felt like I was going to throw up. This wasn't just a fling. This was something deeper, something ongoing. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. I needed to confront her again, but this time, I'd have proof. When Jessica got home that evening, I was ready. I had her phone in my hand and a folder of printed screenshots on the kitchen table. She walked in, saw my face, and immediately knew something was up. "What now?" she asked, her tone dripping with irritation. "Sit down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." "We already talked," she said, rolling her eyes. "I'm not doing this again." "Oh, you're doing this," I snapped, slamming the phone and the folder onto the table. "Because I've got proof now, Jess. Proof that you've been lying to me." Her eyes darted to the folder, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear on her face. "What's that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Messages. Photos. Calls. Everything you've been hiding from me," I said, my voice breaking. "So don't even try to lie this time." She sat down, her hands trembling. "Michael, I can explain." "Explain?" I said, cutting her off. "Explain what, Jess? How you've been sneaking around with Tyler. How you've been using my truck to hook up with him. How you've been lying to my face for months." Tears started streaming down her face, but I wasn't buying it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "Didn't mean for what to happen?" I shouted. "Didn't mean to cheat on me? Didn't mean to lie to me? Or didn't mean to get caught?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, crying, while I stood over her, my heart shattering into a million pieces. For the first time in my life, I felt truly broken. After that confrontation, Jessica and I barely spoke. I'd told her to pack a bag and stay somewhere else for a few days because I needed space. She went to her sister's house, or so she said. Honestly, I didn't care where she went as long as she wasn't in my face. Those first few days were the hardest. I'd sit in the house, staring at the walls, wondering how it all fell apart. Every memory of our relationship felt tainted. The vacations, the holidays, the lazy Sunday mornings, all of it seemed like a lie. How long had she been seeing him? Was it just him? Or were there others? The questions never stopped. I'd always considered myself a strong guy, but this broke me. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see her with him. The thought of them together made me physically ill. A few friends reached out, sensing something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. How do you even start that conversation? Hey, my wife's been cheating on me, and I just found out. It felt too raw, too humiliating. So, I kept it to myself, letting the anger and sadness eat away at me. But eventually, I realized I couldn't keep living like this. I needed answers. Closure. Something to help me make sense of the mess she'd made of our lives. And that's when I decided to dig deeper. Determined to understand the full scope of what had happened, I began piecing together the timeline of her betrayal. I went through old receipts, cross-checked her claimed outings with her actual locations, and even reached out to people who might have known what was going on. It felt invasive, but at that point, I didn't care. I needed the truth. Jessica's sister, Lisa, was the first person I called. I didn't outright accuse Jessica, but I asked if Lisa knew anything about her behavior over the past few months. Lisa hesitated before answering, which only made my stomach twist more. "Michael," she said softly, "I don't want to get in the middle of this, but maybe you should talk to Jessica directly." Her vague response was confirmation enough that something wasn't right. Lisa knew more than she was letting on, and her reluctance to speak only fueled my suspicions. Then I remembered Jessica's emails. She rarely used her laptop, but when she did, she never logged out. Sure enough, when I opened it, there it was, a string of emails between her and Tyler. They weren't as explicit as the texts, but they painted a clear picture of an affair that had been going on for nearly a year. Their messages weren't just about sneaking around, they were about plans, feelings, and even discussions about a future together. A future. Without me. By the time I finished going through her emails, I felt like a hollow shell of the man I used to be. The depth of her betrayal was staggering. She wasn't just lying to me, she was actively building a life behind my back. Every time she'd kissed me goodbye or said she loved me, it had been a lie. The weight of it was unbearable. I knew I needed to confront her one last time. Not for explanations, I'd had enough lies to last a lifetime, but to finally say my piece and take back some shred of dignity. Jessica came home late that evening, looking tired but not the least bit guilty. She set her bag down and sighed. "Michael, I think we need to talk." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, now you want to talk? That's rich." She looked confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I picked up the stack of emails and messages I'd printed out and threw them on the table. "It means I know everything, Jess. All of it. The texts, the emails, the lies. I know about Tyler." Her face turned pale. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it again, but then she just sank into a chair. "Michael, Don't," I said, cutting her off. "I'm done listening to your excuses. You've lied to me for months, maybe longer. You've made me feel like I was crazy for suspecting anything. And for what? So you could run around with him while I sat here like a fool?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I'd cried enough for both of us. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "I was unhappy, Michael. I didn't know how to tell you." "So you cheated?" I shouted. "That's how you deal with being unhappy? You destroy our marriage? Our life? That's your solution?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, crying, as I stood over her, feeling both enraged and utterly broken. I'd loved her with everything I had, and she'd thrown it all away. "I want a divorce," I said finally, my voice cold and flat. "You can pack your things and leave. I'm done." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stay to listen. I walked out of the house, needing air, needing space, needing to be anywhere but near her. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of clarity. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a step toward reclaiming my life. And that was enough for now. The days following that final confrontation were a blur of paperwork, packing, and awkward exchanges. Jessica tried to reach out a few times, sending long, apologetic texts or leaving tearful voicemails. I didn't respond to any of them. I couldn't. I had nothing left to say. Instead, I focused on rebuilding myself. The process was anything but easy. Every corner of our home was a reminder of her, of us. I couldn't look at the kitchen without picturing her cooking breakfast, couldn't sit on the couch without remembering the nights we'd spent binge-watching shows together. It was suffocating. The first thing I did was change the locks. It felt symbolic, like I was closing the door not just on her, but on the life we'd built together. I packed up her remaining things and left them at her sister's house. Lisa didn't say much when I dropped them off, but there was pity in her eyes. I hated it. I didn't want pity. I wanted my dignity back. I started going to therapy, a big step for me. I'd always thought therapy was for people who couldn't handle their problems on their own, but I was wrong. Sitting in that room, talking to someone who didn't judge me or pity me, was like a lifeline. It helped me unpack everything, my anger, my sadness, my confusion. It gave me a safe space to feel without the fear of being judged. Jessica tried to apologize a few more times, but I shut her down every time. She claimed she wanted to make things right, but I didn't see how that was possible. You can't unring a bell, and you sure as hell can't unbreak a heart. What she'd done was irreversible, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into her web of lies. One day, about a month after she'd moved out, I came across an old photo album. It was tucked away in the back of a closet I'd been meaning to clean out. Flipping through it, I saw pictures of us on our wedding day, smiling like we had the whole world ahead of us. I didn't cry this time. I just closed the album and set it aside. It was a chapter of my life, and now it was over. Slowly but surely, I started to rebuild. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, threw myself into work, and even picked up a few hobbies I'd always wanted to try. I started hiking on the weekends and took a cooking class, just for the hell of it. It felt good to focus on myself for a change. One of the hardest things to let go of was the idea of closure. I'd wanted answers, a clear understanding of why she did what she did. But I realized that no explanation would ever make it okay. Closure wasn't something she could give me, it was something I had to find for myself. I also learned to forgive, not her, but myself. I stopped blaming myself for not seeing the signs sooner, for trusting her, for loving her. She made her choices, and those choices had nothing to do with me. Letting go of that guilt was like shedding a heavy weight I didn't even realize I was carrying. If I could give advice to anyone going through something similar, it would be this: trust your gut. If something feels off, don't ignore it. It's easy to dismiss red flags when you don't want to believe they're real, but pretending they're not there doesn't make them go away. Also, don't be afraid to ask for help. Whether it's from friends, family, or a therapist, having a support system can make all the difference. You don't have to go through it alone. Finally, remember that life goes on. It doesn't feel like it in the moment, it feels like your world is ending. But it's not. It's just changing. And change, while painful, is often necessary. Looking back now, I realize that Jessica's betrayal, as devastating as it was, gave me a chance to reevaluate my life. It forced me to confront things I'd been ignoring, not just in my marriage, but in myself. It's been a long road, but I'm finally starting to feel like me again. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: heartbreak doesn't have to define you. It's just a chapter in your story, not the whole book. And sometimes, the ending you never wanted is the beginning you didn't know you needed.